Hello my friends, welcome to a new episode on your channel. This episode continues the second part of the shepherd and princess story.
But Jan smiled and shook his head. Whoever wants this Nosegay must say, Vinichko, please give me that Nosegay. The princess was a merry girl, so she laughed and said, Vinichko, please give me that Nosegay. Jan gave it to her at once and she thanked him sweetly. The next day Jan went again to the castle garden and plucked another Nosegay. Then in the afternoon he drove his sheep through the village as before, playing his pipe. The princess was standing at the palace window waiting to see him. When the wind brought her a whiff of the fresh Nosegay that was even more fragrant than the first one, she ran out to Jan and said, Vinichko, please give me that Nosegay. But Jan smiled and shook his head. Whoever wants this Nosegay must say, my dear Vinichko, I beg you most politely please to give me that Nosegay. My dear Vinichko, the princess repeated demurely, I beg you most politely please to give me that Nosegay. So Jan gave her the second Nosegay. The princess put it in her window and the fragrance filled the village until people from far and near came to see it. After that every day Jan gathered the Nosegay for the princess and every day the princess stood at the palace window waiting to see the handsome shepherd. And always when she asked for the Nosegay, she said, please. In this way a month went by and the day arrived when the neighboring princes were to come to meet the princess. They were to come in fine array, the people said, and the princess had ready a kerchief and a ring for the one who would please her most. Jan planted the axe in the meadow and, leaving the sheep to graze about it, went to the castle where he ordered the servants of the chest to dress him as befitted his rank. They put a white suit upon him and gave him a white horse with trappings of silver. So he rode to the palace and took his place with the other princes, but behind them so that the princess had to crane her neck to see him. One by one the various princes rode by the princess, but to none of them did the princess give her kerchief and ring. Jan was the last to salute her, and instantly she handed him her favors. Then before the king or the other suitors could speak to him, Jan put spurs to his horse and rode off. That evening as usual, when he was driving home his sheep, the princess ran out to him and said, Jan, it was you. But Jan laughed and put her off. How can a poor shepherd be a prince? He asked. The princess was not convinced and she said in another month, when the princes were to come again, she would find out. So for another month Jan tended sheep and plucked Nosegays for the merry little princess and the princess waited for him at the palace window every afternoon and when she saw him she always spoke to him politely and said, please. When the day for the second meeting of the princes came, the servants of the chest arrayed Jan in a suit of red and gave him a sorrel horse with trappings of gold. Jan again rode to the palace and took his place with the other princes, but behind them so that the princess had to crane her neck to see him. Again the suitors rode by the princess one by one, but at each of them she shook her head impatiently and kept her kerchief and ring until Jan saluted her. Instantly the ceremony was over, Jan put spurs to his horse and rode off and, although the king sent after him to bring him back, Jan was able to escape. That evening when he was driving home his sheep the princess ran out to him and said, Vinichko, it was you. I know it was. But again Jan laughed and put her off and asked her how she could think such a thing of a poor shepherd. Again the princess was not convinced and she said in another month, when the princes were to come for the third and last time, she would make sure. So for another month Jan tended his sheep and plucked Nosegays for the merry little princess and the princess waited for him at the palace window every afternoon and, when she saw him, she always said politely, please. For the third meeting of the princes the servants of the chest arrayed Jan in a gorgeous suit of black and gave him a black horse with golden trappings studded in diamonds. He rode to the palace and took his place behind the other suitors. Things went as before and again the princess saved her kerchief and ring for him. This time when he tried to ride off the other suitors surrounded him and, before he escaped, one of them wounded him on the foot. He galloped back to the castle in the forest, dressed once again in his shepherd's clothes, and returned to the meadow where his sheep were grazing. There he sat down and bound up his wounded foot in the kerchief which the princess had given him. Then, when he had eaten some bread and cheese from his magic wallet, he stretched himself out in the sun and fell asleep. Meanwhile the princess, who was sorely vexed that her mysterious suitor had again escaped, slipped out of the palace and ran up the mountain path to see for herself whether the shepherd were really with his sheep. She found Jan asleep and, when she saw her kerchief bound about his foot, she knew that he was the prince. She woke him up and cried, You are he. You know you are. Jan looked at her and laughed and he asked, How can I be a prince? But I know you are. The princess said, "Oh, Yanichko, dear Yanichko, I beg you please to tell me." So then Yang, because he always did anything the princess asked him when she said, "Please," told her his true name and his rank. The princess, overjoyed to hear that her dear shepherd was really a prince, carried him off to her father, the king. "This is the man I shall marry," she said, "this and none other." So Yan and the merry little princess were married and lived very happily. And the people of the country, when they speak of the princess, always say, "That's a princess for you." Why, even if she is a princess, she always says please to her own husband.
The lesson of the story is that literature is the foundation of success in a decent life.